Tonight I'm giving a kickoff on John Molyneux's What is the Real Marxism Part 1, which I guess we're calling The Science of Marxism, but this is going to be a bit more comprehensive. And I'm sorry to once again be coming to y'all with like an abstract philosophical topic with no slides. Anyway, to get to it. So to quote Marx, as in private life, one distinguishes between what a man thinks and says of himself and what he really is and does. So more in historical struggles must one distinguish the phases and fancies of the parties from their real organism and their real interests, their conception of themselves from the reality. And so that is to say that we must delineate between how something is abstractly presented versus how it operates in realities based on actions, motivations, etc. And there's often discrepancy between conceptual and actual. Since Marx's death, numerous iterations and tendencies of Marxism have emerged that diverge and conflict from one another. These conflicts and contradictions make it essential that we determine what Marxism is so that we can parse the self-described Marxists from those who are practicing genuine Marxism as we would see it. So in all great social conflicts of our age, self-proclaimed Marxists are found to be on opposing sides of the revolutionary barricades, to quote the reading. And some examples the reading gives is Planktonov and Lenin in 1977 and Kautsky and Luxemburg in 1919. The opposition between so-called Marxists compels us to question what actually defines Marxism. So why can't we just accept anyone who calls themselves a Marxist as a genuine Marxist? One, this is very convenient for the bourgeoisie and its denouncement of Marxism. It allows them to bundle true revolutionaries like Lenin and Trotsky with pseudo-Marxist totalitarians like Pol Pot, thus permitting Marxism to be condemned as a whole based off the crimes of individuals who could not truly be said to be part of the Marxist tradition. Such an approach is fundamentally contemplative. Marxists seek to change the world and thus must have decisiveness in theory and in practice. Therefore, a dividing line must demarcate the genuine from the false. We must reject the idea that anyone who accepts Marx's works as Marxist as well. Marxism is not a form of faith. It is not dogmatic. So to quote Engels, Marxism is not a dogma, but a guide to action. Excuse me while I move my cat. Right. And therefore, it must be a living, self-developing theory that is capable of growth and change, and which is capable of analyzing and responding to ever-changing realities and new events. So Trotsky said that Marxism is above all a method of analysis and not of texts, but of social relations. And therefore, we must understand that we don't take Marxist assertions on faith. We take them because they have been made through they have been acquired through a robust method of analysis. So this brings us to the concept of orthodox Marxism and method. Marxist George Lukács, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, describes orthodox Marxism as it does not imply uncritical acceptance of the results of Marx's investigations. It is not the belief in this or that thesis, nor the exegesis of a sacred book. On the contrary, orthodoxy refers exclusively to method. So Lukács' description takes Marxism's need for development into account, but it is inadequate as distinguishing between Marx's method and his analysis, or reducing Marxism purely to its method of analysis. It is inadequate as distinguishing between Marx's method of and his analysis, or reducing Marxism purely to its method of analysis, because the theses derived by Marx's method, if the theses derived by Marx's method are demonstrably wrong, then the method of analysis that led to these wrong theses would be questionable. So if capitalism were to develop into something other than socialism or barbarism, Marx's theories would be refuted by the evidence at hand, and Marxism as a method of analysis would be demonstrated to be ineffectual. And Trotsky pointed out that without Marxist analysis of the contradictions of capitalism, then socialist program would appear to be utopic rather than a practical outcome of contradictions of capital. Therefore, the analysis and conclusions of Marx the analysis and conclusions that Marx comes to come through his methods and are just as essential as the method itself. I'm sorry, the cat's in my way again. She wants to be part of the presentation. So the class basis of Marxism, understanding the philosophy or theory requires acknowledging the social being that constitutes its foundation. As Marx puts it, it is not social consciousness that determines social being, but social being that determines social consciousness. Thus, in the Communist Manifesto, Marx defines schools of socialism by reference to the class interests they represent, from feudal socialism all the way to bourgeois socialism. Similarly, as Trotsky demonstrated, fascism finds its dependency upon the class position of the petty bourgeoisie. So the same understanding must be applied to Marxism. Marxism must be understood through the class interests it represents, as was the procedure of both Marx and Engels. And Marxism is the recognition of class antagonisms between workers and capitalists from the point of view of the proletariat. Marx said, just as the economists are the scientific representatives of the bourgeois class, so the socialists and communists are the theoreticians of the proletarian class. So Marxism as a theory for the working class is meant to represent the whole working class. To quote again from the Communist Manifesto, the communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. One, the national struggles of the proletarian of different countries. They point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of nationality. And in the various stages of development, which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. So Marxism arose when the material conditions allowed for it. Exploitation and oppression existed before capitalism, as well as during the rise of capitalism, but Marxism could not emerge until productive forces and thus the proletariat were developed to the point where the proletariat's power to overthrow capital was recognizable. Thus, Marx only arrived at Marxism through his relationship to the revolutionary workers, specifically in Paris. This allowed Marx to recognize the proletariat and as he says, proclaims the dissolution of the hitherto existing world. It merely declares the secret of its own existence, since in fact it is the dissolution of this order. This differs from the positions of Kautsky and Lenin, who argue that socialism emerged from a revolutionary intelligentsia, though Molyneux suggests that Lenin's thinking on this matter changed with his experience with the revolutionary working class. So Marxism is also a theory of proletarian victory. To quote Marx again, long before me, bourgeois historians have described the historical development of this class struggle, and bourgeois economists the economic autonomy of classes. What I did that was new was to prove that the existence of classes is only bound up with particular historical phases in the development, and that the class struggle necessarily leads to the dictatorship of the proletariat, that this dictatorship itself only constitutes the transition to the abolition of all classes into a classless society. And to quote Lenin, a Marxist is solely someone who extends the recognition of the class struggle to the recognition of the dictatorship of the proletariat. This is the touchstone on which all the real understanding and recognition of Marxism should be tested. Therefore, in combining the theory of the common interests of the proletariat, Marxism as the product of the emergence of the proletariat struggle against capital, Marxism as the theory for victory of the proletariat. By combining these, we can see that Marxism fundamentally is the theory of the international proletarian revolution. So that brings us to like kind of what this was advertised as, the scientific status of Marxism. So let's just start with the two. There are like two camps that use Marx's orientation towards the proletariat to deny its scientific quality. Some are like socialist Karl Mannheim, who argue that since Marx is based off a definite social group, the proletariat, it cannot be specific or scientific. And others argue that since it is scientific, it cannot be from the standpoint of the proletariat. To give an example of somebody that takes this position, Althusser, I think their name is, and it claims that it reduces Marxism to the level of ideology. However, if we analyze what we mean by science, we will find that the proletarian orientation of Marxism does nothing to diminish its scientific nature. So first, I just want to briefly touch on like natural science. Natural science consists of a series of provisional relative truths produced by developing practical human needs and demonstrating their truth through this practice. Since it's observing and measuring the natural world, natural science can be said to be objective, but natural science is both historical and changing. And natural science applies regardless of class, like gravity acts the same on a member of the bourgeoisie and the proletarian, while social science we'll see operates different on different members of the class. And so just to kind of like give an example here of how natural science is both historical, changing, and provisional. The concept of gravity is developed wildly over time. Like in antiquity, gravity was understood that the weight of an object is what pulled it to the ground. So objects of different weight fell at different speeds. This evolved to our understanding that things fell at the same speed, to Isaac Newton's scientific formulation of gravity, Cavendish's discovery of the gravitational constant, all the way to now we have Einstein, who has developed the theory of gravity, which is essentially bends in space-time created by mass and energy. And in ancient Greece, the practice of gravity, like they could understand gravity through their practice because all they needed to understand was things fell towards the earth. But in like our modern conceptualization, our practice is measuring black holes, the size of the universe, et cetera, which all need Einstein's model of gravity. So that brings us to the concept of social science, which has some of the similar characteristics of natural science, such as its provisional nature. But it is the study of social phenomenon and relationships, and thus cannot be impartial, right? Like it arises from society in which social laws can be changed to alter society and benefit a given class. So like capitalism's laws are oriented to benefit the capitalist class. So just to quote the reading here, first, knowledge is always a relationship between the knower and the known, between the subject and the object. In natural science, the object of knowledge, nature, exists outside human beings. Society, however, is human beings and the assembly of human relations. Nature and the laws of nature are not a creation of humanity. Society and the laws of society are. The world of nature can be altered by men and women, but only on the basis of natural laws, which cannot be altered. Social laws, however, can be changed. And another quote, just real quickly, but to expect social science to be impartial in a society of wage slavery is silly and naive, as to expect impartiality from employers on the question of whether the workers' wages should be increased by decreasing the profits of capital. So the bourgeoisie use social science as a form of apologetics for capitalist society, and they try to naturalize capitalism by saying that it reflects human nature, like that we're all like sloth-like and need the motivation, et cetera, of capitalism to operate, and that it's like an incentive structure. That this human nature makes capitalism fundamentally unescapable or inescapable. The proletariat, on the other hand, is the class interested and capable of understanding society in its totality, since the objective of the proletariat is not defending how things are and trying to naturalize them, but to change the social laws that are holding back our liberation. So to quote Marx again, the existence of revolutionary ideas in a particular period presupposes the existence of a revolutionary class. So now we're going to talk briefly about theory to practice. So there are connections between the proletariat struggle and the main propositions of Marxism. Let's say vis-a-vis the political principles and program first. Yeah. Internationalism is so like the proletariat is an international class. It emerged alongside capitalism, which created commonalities in both modes of production and culture. The internationalism of the bourgeoisie is qualitatively inferior to that of the proletariat. And this is because their bourgeois internationalism is limited by national antagonisms, while Marxist internationalism, or the internationalism of the proletariat, prioritizes the whole instead of the part, as we discussed earlier, and thus can unify as a class in a way the bourgeoisie cannot. And there's a quote from the reading. It says, "The worker who rejects his government's engagement in war is far more internationalist than the professor who's traveled the world and learned about different cultures and languages, yet still supports his own government in times of war." Another principle is state ownership. The only way the proletariat can self-emancipate and defeat the bourgeoisie is by taking control of the means of production, and this can only be achieved through the creation of a proletarian state. Marx said, "We have seen above that the first step in revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class to win the battle of democracy. The proletariat will use this political supremacy to wrest, by degrees, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e. of the proletariat, organized as the ruling class." So there's a discrepancy to be made here. There are state socialists who believe that the state ownership of the means of production is the ends of the struggle, and the working class are the means of that struggle. But true Marxism believes that the emancipation of the working class is the end goal, and state ownership is the means by which we reach that end goal. And so obviously this leads into the concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is a controversial topic for people who are ill-informed on it. but it is an extension of the proletarian class struggle to the point of victory. And it was essentially discovered vis-a-vis the Paris Commune in 1871. It showed the state needed to be smashed, not co-opted. And the actions of the Paris Commune indicated that the first principles of a workers' democracy, election, and the ability to recall delegates immediately, with delegates being compensated the same as workers, and the replacement of the standing army with armed workers, etc., were effective. The workers of Petrograd created organizational forms uniquely suited to the workers' power and the dictatorship of the proletariat as well. These forms were known as Soviet Workers' Councils. And that's kind of where we see the victory of the proletariat and then the emergence of the dictatorship and like what forms it would take. So we have some Marxist theoretical foundations to go over too. So first is the materialist conception of history. We all know kind of the brief outline of idealism versus materialism. Idealism asserts that history is a series of phases determined by ideas or consciousness. This has a fundamental basis in the division of labor, with mental labor being performed by the ruling class and manual labor being performed by the working class. And this allows consciousness to exist outside of practice, something that represents itself without being real. Then we have materialism, which can be conceived of both in the historical materialist perspective that we as Marxists use and bourgeois materialism. Bourgeois materialism asserts that humans are the product of circumstances. It is effectively mechanical and deterministic. However, to avoid fatalism, the bourgeois materialists make some exemption for idealism, such as knowledge, science, or the will of the elite, moving history forward. Marx overcomes this contradiction in bourgeois materialism through the concept of practice, in which humans shape and change their circumstances through their actions. This is a revolutionary practice, and Marx views labor as a concrete, practical activity that forms the basis of human existence in history. And the proletariat is the first class in history of immediate producers who can transform society and become its masters. So that brings us to the theory of social revolution. Marx's explanation of the economic underpinnings of society, the base, consists of the forces of production, and this goes back to my last kickoff, as well as the relations of production, which together constitute the mode of production and create the basis for social revolution. The productive forces develop until they come into conflict with existing relations of production, and this conflict leads to a period of social revolution in which old relations are dismantled and new relations emerge. And the contradiction between forces of production and relations of production is rooted in the class struggle. We can't conceive of it separately from it. So workers have to deal with alienation in our labor. Like as we've previously established, labor creates the world, but labor's labor essentially to enrich capitalists in an abstract sense. Through their labor produces commodities for the marketplace, and that fundamentally alienates the worker from their labor, which leads to immiseration for the worker and creates a world that opposes the laborer. It is also an economic fact related to all wage labor. Alienation is not like a sensation on the part of the laborer, but rather a phenomena of commodity production. This brings us to the concept of the dual role of labor, where it is both necessary to create the world while also leading to our immiseration, to immiserating the laborers who carry out the labor that makes the world. So that implies that there is potential for human liberation with the abolition of alienated labor. So in the introduction to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of the right, which I have not read, so I do not claim to be an expert on what I'm about to espouse, Marx says that the results of his analysis of the alienated labor and historical materialism established the revolutionary role of the proletariat. So he's to quote him directly, when the proletariat announces the dissolution of the existing, I already quoted this, but the existing social order, it declares the secret of its own existence, for it is the effective dissolution of this order. So that brings us briefly to Marx's work Capital. It provides a scientific foundation for the workers' movement by revealing the operations and nature of capitalism. And it's the application of the theory of historical materialism rooted in the analysis of alienated labor. So to conclude, in theory, the proletariat revolution appears as the consequence of the theories of historical materialism and surplus value. But in reality, it is also their foundation. The empirical confirmation of this proposition is found in the fact that as a rule, workers' revolution began spontaneously, like we saw in Paris and Russia. The role of Marxism is not to create or launch the revolution to guide it to victory. Thanks.